During World War II, Germany would use its U-boats to sink ships in the Caribbean in what would be known as the Battle of the Caribbean. It was a theater of the Battle of the Atlantic, where German U-boat campaigns had been attacking the British since 1939. The Atlantic campaign was done with the hope of terrorizing and depriving the British in hopes for a negotiated peace. A paper by Commander Haslinger writes that starting January, German U-boats would harass the US East Coast for a few months until Operation Paukenschlag, until a leapfrog convoy system was established, but while they were there, they inflicted many losses since the US Navy was unprepared. Haslinger writes that beginning in 1942, Admiral Dönitz, commander of the submarine fleet, would shift his operations towards the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. The Caribbean proved advantageous for the U-boats, since the rudimentary targeting that limited them in the Atlantic Ocean was less of an issue with the many choke points in the Caribbean. Haslinger also writes that 95% of American oil went from the Gulf Coast ports to East Coast refineries. Admiral Dönitz used this vulnerability to target U.S. oil tankers to hurt U.S. manufacturing, since its industry and shipbuilding were reliant on that oil. The Germans also targeted oil tankers sailing to Dutch oil refineries in Aruba from Venezuela, as their tankers were specially designed to enter the shallow Gulf of Venezuela, and a sunken ship had to be replaced with a newly built ship. U-Boats.net has a very nice map that serves as a good visual representation of the German sinkings peaking in 1942. The U-boat campaign wreaked havoc in the Caribbean. For example, near Puerto Rico and the passage of Mona, 2 ships were sunk. The island proper would suffer from food shortages thanks to the campaign. One was the Cheerio, sailing from Ciudad Trujillo to Ponce, sunk at the peak of the campaign on June 19, 1942. All 9 sailors would be rescued. Another ship was the Pillory, sunk fairly late on June 5, 1944. It was sailing from San Juan to Guayanilla. Of the 47 on board, only 22 would survive. Ruse writes that on the island of Mona in 1937, the U.S. Forest Service and Puerto Rican government established a civilian conservation corps camp called Camp Cofresi. On March 3, 1942, a German U-boat attacked the island of Mona, which at the time housed 170 jóvenes or youths working for the National Youth Administration, plus the lighthouse keeper and his family. The island's cliffs were shelled 30 times. The governor's office, the next day, at 10 in the morning, would learn of the attack over the radio from Assistant Director of the camp, Roberto Casaba. El Mundo reported on the attack the next day, March 4, 1942, stating that no one was hurt. The New York Times article from the 4th states that this was the first attack by Germany on U.S. soil in the Atlantic, as Puerto Rico and the Isle of Mona were part of the U.S. No damage was done to the camp, with the New York Times adding, "Forestry officials confirmed the attack, which was put down here merely as a nuisance shelling." All this was surprising to learn about. I wasn't aware of how far U-boats went in order to attack the U.S. I was also intrigued that Puerto Rico itself was directly affected, and even the now practically uninhabited island of Mona was unable to avoid the Second World War.